previously on Crime Adjacent. Becca Briggs grew up in Ridgewood and was the kind of kid who smelled like hay and saddle leather, who skipped dances and birthday parties and sleepovers to muck stalls for riding lessons at Constant Bird's horse stable out in the valley. If you'd asked Becca back then, she would have told you her whole future lived in that barn. But life intervened. Her father, a quiet accountant at a coaxial cable firm, one of the town's largest employers, was caught embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars and was sent to prison. Her mother died of a stroke less than a year later. By 18, Becca was suddenly broke and alone. She picked up shifts at the Ridgewood Applebee's, waiting tables, taking doubles, barely making rent. That's where she met Robert Bobby Briggs, older, rough, oddly innocent, and a little bit dangerous in a way she found appealing. They married fast, too fast. That whole year felt like a blur. But for Becca, life was slowly coming back into focus. Things with she and Briggs were wearing off after only a few months, and Becca began to see a better life for herself, elsewhere, anywhere else. And then it happened. Briggs was murdered, violently, becoming one of the original victims of the rest stop killer. Becca took it as a sign. It was time to move on, to get her life together. She enrolled in the local community college, got good grades, and transferred to UC Davis, where she majored in animal sciences on the way to a vet's degree. She would work her way back into the horse world by becoming their doctor. But before veterinary school, she and a few fellow students founded a company that repurposes waste from luxury dog food factories into high-end, eco-friendly fertilizer for vineyards up and down the entire state. It sounds niche, sure, but it also became wildly, insanely profitable. They began selling not just to vineyards, but to farms and garden clubs all over the country. The company's on the NASDAQ now. Today, Becca owns her own horse farm down in Temecula, raising elite show-jumping horses for 5-star Grand Prix riders. She rides some herself, but not at that level. Just having her own place, her own barn smelling of hay and saddle leather. That was enough. She didn't brag about this, but you can find the photos online. Becca maintains an image of a rough-and-tumble horse trainer and kind of a podunk hayseed type of person. But she also attends the Monaco Grand Prix every year and spends much of her time hopping back and forth between Palm Springs for the California horse circuit or Wellington for the Florida one. Sometimes the western coast of Spain for the Sunshine Tour. Becca joked, "If you can't ride 'em, breed 'em." I tracked her down for an interview. She agreed to show me her barn, which is, quite frankly, glorious, and smells like sweet hay and warm earth, and is filled with the steady, relentless munching of horses feeding on oat mash and timothy. Honestly, I can see the appeal. After a casual tour, I asked if she had any idea how her former husband might have been targeted, how he crossed paths with the most prolific serial killer in history. Becca smiled sadly and shook her head, saying, "It's because of those goddamn Frosties." Here's the story. But first, you can find bonus information about the show and unlock ad-free listening at our Patreon page, patreon.com/crimeadjacent. And you can also join our true crime and criminal profiling reading group. Think of it as like returning to college as an older and wiser student, but with no grades or pressure of any kind. Just a cool group of curious nerds who want to learn together and make sense of the senseless. I hope you join us. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. In January 1996, Briggs shared a one-bedroom apartment with Becca on Elm Street. Yes, again, the exact same Elm Street where both of the previous victims lived. Don't read too much into this, because the thing is, Elm Street is a long thoroughfare, running for miles. It stretches from the West End, where the valley is, through town, and then way out to where the new hospital is located along the eastern border of town. Tommy Coulet lived on one end, the West End, while Bobby Calvin lived more or less in the middle, closer to the quaint downtown, and Briggs and Becca lived on the other end, under the freeway practically, where the rattle and clank of the roaring interstate kept rents low and economies looser. During our interview, I asked if she was ever afraid of the rest stop killer, and she said no, not really. For one thing, she keeps a collection of guns and rifles in her ranch house, has gotten to be a good shot, and isn't afraid to advertise it. Plus, she's gone a lot, all over the world, at one horse show or another. It'd be hard to track her down. But mostly, she said the killer always targeted men in one random small town in Northern California. She assumed she was safe way down in Temecula. Becca recounted what happened that Saturday, January 20th, 1996, the night Briggs was abducted. She said nothing stood out to her. It was just a routine day for them both. Briggs, half hung over from her previous night of drugs, drinking, and marathon sex, struck out early that Saturday morning. Becca told police before 8 a.m., which counted as early for both of them. She told me, "I think he was trying to avoid the apartment manager. They owed rent." Briggs clocked into his job as a backroom stalker at the factory store's outlet mall in nearby Vacaville. Timesheets showed he worked from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at a winter clothing store. Detective Jones said she initially thought it was strange that no one reported actually seeing him at work that day. But the more she found out about Briggs, she began to wonder if he wasn't conning the company in some way, like clocking in and then sleeping off his hangover in the parking lot, his co-workers too scared to tell the manager. No one trusted or believed Briggs. No one reported interacting with him that day. At all. No one except Becca. Jones thought that was odd until she discovered that was the routine. People avoided him, like a plague. Becca said Briggs arrived home at about 5:30 p.m. She could hear him coming as he argued outside with a neighbor about a barking dog. Once inside, he and Becca had a quickie, and then a little before 7 p.m. went out to dinner at the local Taco Bell on Cherry Street. Becca laughed at the rush of old memories, many of which were good. She said, "We were big fans of the do-it-first method, meaning have sex before dinner so you don't feel so stuffed afterwards. But I'll be honest," Becca continued, "Bobby was more of a let's do it before and after type of guy." So, afterwards, they watched some television that night, and then at 9 p.m., Briggs suddenly got up and grabbed his keys. He announced, "I could go for a Wendy's." Becca remembers it clearly, like it was yesterday. She knew exactly what he meant. Briggs had a thing for Wendy's Frosties and French fries. He liked to dip the hot, salty fries into the frozen treat. Becca said Briggs may have been an asshole with a quick temper and loose morals, but he was also a lost little boy in many ways. She felt a kinship with him in that regard. By January, however, she wasn't sure how the relationship was going. She wasn't sure this was the life she wanted for herself. He could be, indeed, as she told the newspaper, an impossible asshole, and she wondered what she was doing with him. And yet, she had to admit Briggs could be charming, playful, innocent even, like a happy child content with the small wonders of life. It was a side of Briggs no one else saw, and Becca said it's what made her waver, besides the fact that she didn't have any money to go anywhere else. She also said they were both, in a way, like two lost children, leaning on each other for support. She remembers just staring at him that night, as he stood by the door with his keys in hand. She liked how happy a simple treat like Frosties and French fries could make him. She said to bring her a Frosty as well. They'd watch some TV together, she said, and maybe see what happens afterwards. That was the last she saw him. In fact, that was the last anyone saw him. Only Briggs and the killer know what happened between when he left the apartment at 9 p.m. and when hikers found him the following morning and called police. When he got the call about another body in the valley, Chief Al Williams, detective at the time, headed out to Hunter Hill immediately in search of Briggs' abandoned truck. That's where they found the abandoned cars from Tommy Coulee and Bobby Calvin. Williams wanted to secure the scene and any evidence before the highway patrol had the truck towed. But Briggs' truck wasn't there. As Williams stood in the parking lot, scratching his head and staring at the vacant rest stop with an amazing view of the entire bay, his radio squawked. A Ridgewood beat officer found the abandoned truck on Cherry Street. Williams said he called Jones immediately. They shared the same thought. The killer was definitely local. Jones got out there fast with the forensics crew. They swept the truck for fingerprints, blood, or other signs of violence. They found nothing, not even a Frosty cup or a sack of fries. That was important. It was key to the timeline. It meant, as Williams and Jones surmised, that the killer took Briggs before he made it to the Wendy's. This matches where they ended up finding his truck, abandoned on the side of the road on Cherry Street, pointed towards the Wendy's, a quarter-mile away. It's always remarkable to think of these narrow timelines in our lives when we're out doing just random everyday tasks and suddenly our lives intersect with tragedy. Or not. He was so close to the restaurant. Would he have been safer there? There were lights, people, maybe security cameras, who knows? That becomes a recurring theme in this case, and maybe life in general, all these tiny moments of vulnerability and bad luck. Jones said they didn't find any signs of violence in the truck or outside of it. No blood, dents, weird handprints in weird places. But they did find one critical thing that was completely out of the ordinary: the tire. The rear passenger side tire was loose, nearly falling off. 4 of the 5 lug nuts had been removed and the 5th was loose. It was clearly tampered with, no question. Becca is positive the killer did it, given how much attention Briggs paid to his pride and joy. She said, "No way he just rode around in a busted tire. No way. Bobby got by with that truck. He took care of it." The wobbly tire stumped Williams at first. Perhaps Briggs broke down and a good Samaritan stopped to lend a hand before incapacitating him. Cherry Street was a populated thoroughfare. Even at night, someone might have noticed a struggle. And again, no signs of struggle were apparent either inside or outside of the truck or even around it. So Williams initially suspected that the men perhaps knew each other, or perhaps the killer once again charmed a man into his car. Not Jones. She'd seen this before. In fact, it was the first thing she could think of once she noticed the sabotage. Me too. On March 22, 1970, a pregnant woman named Kathleen Johns was traveling from Southern California to Petaluma in nearby Marin County with her 10-month-old daughter also in the car. It was a little after 11 p.m., dark, lonely. The excellent podcast, Zodiac Speaking, did a deep dive into this story, as did Robert Graysmith in his seminal 1986 book, Zodiac. It goes like this. On Highway 132 near Modesto, probably 60 miles south of Ridgewood as the crow flies and connected by freeways and 2-lane highways, a man in the car behind her suddenly started flashing his lights, like something was wrong. So Johns pulled over. The man said she had a loose tire, that he'd fix it for her. She was grateful for the help. He went about his work on the tire. They said their goodbyes and he pulled away. When Johns hit the road, the wheel wobbled off. The man suddenly returned. He said he'd give them a ride to a gas station, a real good Samaritan, a gentleman. Like Tommy and the 2 Bobbies some 2 decades later, she got into the car. What followed was an aimless, threatening 2-hour car ride from hell, with the man threatening to toss her baby out of the window before killing her. They crisscrossed the Central Valley, with the threats only growing until, at a stop sign, John saw her chance. She jumped out of the car with her baby and ran to hide. The man paused on the road. He turned his headlights off, then back on, then off, then on. Finally, he drove away. Johns waited until she was sure the coast was clear, and then she made her way back to the road where she hitched a ride. Thankfully, this ride went better. She reached the Patterson Police Department where, on the wall, she saw a wanted sign for the Zodiac killer. And the image matched her abductor. It was the Zodiac, she was sure of it. In fact, the Zodiac himself claimed in a later letter to the San Francisco Chronicle that it was, indeed, him. In that letter, mailed on July 24, 1970, after complaining about people not wearing his pins with his crosshair Zodiac symbol, come on, my dude, he wrote, "So I now have a little list, starting with the woman and her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple hours one evening a few months back that ended in my burning her car where I found them." Which he in fact did after Johns made her escape. As with many true crimes, there's much debate. Some think it's him, others think he's merely taking credit. This didn't match the Zodiac's typical MO of stalking young couples at lovers' lanes or lakeside picnic areas. Then again, neither did the murder of cabbie Paul Stein, who was lured to his demise. There's definite proof for that one. The Zodiac mailed in scraps of a shirt he had cut away from Stein's body. So, well, who knows? The point is, Jones stood on the side of Cherry Street, staring at the loose tire on Bobby Briggs' truck and wondered, was the rest stop killer copying the Zodiac? Or, and she said this thought was fleeting and sudden, was the killer actually the Zodiac? Like I went over in the last episode, Jones said she actually looked into it. Jones said it made sense to look at him. He was never captured or identified. I said in the last episode that one suspect lived in Vallejo, another lived in Fairfield, yet a third lived in Vacaville, just a few miles from Ridgewood. In fact, this suspect worked at the California Medical Facility, the exact same prison that housed co-ed killer Ed Kemper and Charles Manson. Can you imagine it? The Zodiac, Ed Kemper, Charles Manson just hanging out. Jones didn't know that at the time. What she did know at the time, however, was that the Vallejo police were still trying to track down the Zodiac with new DNA technology from saliva left behind on postage stamps. It was in the news all the time. Winnie Freeman herself reported on it for the Ridgewood Recorder. A newspaper article titled, "Ridgewood Police Investigate Links Between Valley Killings and Zodiac," ran on February 6, 1996. It caused a stir, to say the least. Jones and Williams were not pleased. Neither was Chief Frank Ricci. They called the publisher of the paper demanding a retraction. But Winnie told me she had multiple sources confirm it, and it turned out to be true. The police were, indeed, investigating any links. They were. Jones confirmed it. I talked to Winnie Freeman about this. She said, "That's what people don't really get about newspapers and reporters. Yes, there are some unscrupulous TV reporters or online idiots who just report anything thrown at them as if it's all real, and then they leave it to listeners to sort out. But that's not how real reporters work." She said, "It's not enough just to have one source. That would mean the newspaper reports as fact just any random thing any random person says, like a Facebook post." Winnie told me, "We need at least 2 sources to confirm the information. Best if you can get 3, especially for something really explosive. I'm not going to tell you who my sources are, but I will tell you this. For the Zodiac connections, I had 4 solid sources. I was definitely running with that story." It didn't help matters that Robert Graysmith's book kept the killer in the popular imagination at the time. But the thing is, Jones said the timing sort of works out. If the Zodiac was in his 20s or 30s in the late 60s, he'd only be in his 40s or maybe 50s at the time of the Ridgewood killings. That's roughly the same age as some of the local men police were looking at. In other words, it wasn't a stretch. But Jones said no obvious links could be established, and police turned their attention closer to home. Perhaps, they wondered, Briggs knew his killer. Perhaps they had a secret liaison Becca just didn't know about. Because the first 2 victims, Tommy Goulet and Bobby Calvin, were closeted gay men taken from a rest stop known for gay cruising. Police theorized Briggs was secretly gay as well, no matter the objections from his wife. This felt wrong to me. For starters, Briggs pissed everyone off. He was sexist, racist, and homophobic to boot. Had the killer tried to cruise him, Briggs's sensors would have gone off immediately. Signs of a fight would have been apparent. Someone would have noticed on busy Cherry Street. But what's more, and I know this from my own experience in cars, Briggs was a survivor. He never would have gotten into a car with a man who gave off bad vibes. A serial killer could hide what profilers call leakage from most people, but not from cagey, street-smart hustlers like Briggs. No way. It doesn't matter in the end, but my hunch was that the killer had studied the Zodiac's methods. He took Briggs' lug nuts at some point, most likely at his apartment, and then followed behind, waiting. Becca said she has spent years thinking the same thing, but she also couldn't figure out why Briggs, of all people. It could have been anyone. If he was targeted at the apartment, it could have been personal. Maybe he had a run-in at some point with the wrong guy. and this was a revenge killing. Maybe the killer, if he was local, also knew about Briggs and figured no one would really miss him or care enough to investigate. We'll never know. There's just no other evidence or witnesses. What I think happened is this. The killer loosened the tires and, just like the Zodiac, waited for the truck to founder. Then, like the Zodiac, he pulled up behind Briggs on Cherry Street to lend a helping hand. The encounter was probably fast, very fast. They both probably stood on the curb for a moment, hands on hips, staring at the tire in confounding silence. Then, having waited for a break in traffic, the killer surprised him, knocked him over the head, and quickly carried him to a waiting car. It would be over in seconds. There's no way to prove this, one way or another, but I found it highly unlikely Briggs got into the killer's car on his own volition, let alone enjoyed an awkward ride out to a secluded valley late at night. It didn't add up. Briggs would have put up a fight. There's no way he's letting some dude just cruise him around a lover's lane. All of this told investigators 3 important things. As they suspected, the killer was strong. Getting the jump on a street fighter like Briggs required fast moves and strong hands. A sneak attack, maybe. Maybe the killer did something to put Briggs at ease. Maybe he did indeed flash a gun. I don't know. The second thing was this. The killer was escalating. No longer content to wait for hours at Hunter Hill or follow his marks there, he moved on to the riskier venture of knocking people out on Cherry Street. So he was strong, escalating, and lastly, I agreed with Jones and Williams. The killer was definitely local. Serial killers usually operate in their comfort zones, at least according to some theories. Remember that FBI symposium on serial killers? The report said they have anchor points of a very defined geographic area where they're comfortable. I'm not going to nerd out too much here on environmental criminology and geographic profiling and how all this stretches back to the Chicago School of Sociology and the effects of environment and social space on criminal offenses because it does seem sort of obvious. People operate where they are, where they know, where they become most comfortable. But do they? There's a formula developed by geographic profiler Kim Rosmos called the Rosmos formula that posits there's sort of a buffer zone or Goldilocks area where serial killers operate. Not too close to home so that they'll be recognized there, but also not too far away so that they're just strangers and completely unfamiliar with the area and easy targets and escape routes and such. Some studies I've read say serial killers operate within a 3-mile radius of home. A Swedish study says it's more like 4 miles, or even 6. The point seems to be the same, close to home. But all this doesn't take into account traveling serial killers, or those who roam long distances like the Golden State Killer, or skip states altogether like Ted Bundy or Edward Wayne Edwards. Then, of course, there's Israel Keyes, an Alaskan serial killer who did indeed target women there, but then also in Vermont, and maybe other states as well, like Washington and New York and Florida. These are indeed random and outside of one's central comfort zone. However, he might have gotten to know these areas well enough to operate because he was known for traveling around the country, burying kill kits, Home Depot buckets with all the supplies he needed for murder in secret places across the country. The amazing podcasts, Somewhere in the Pines and True Crime Bullshit, have dedicated years to finding these buried kill caches whose locations went to the grave when Keyes killed himself in 2012 after being captured. Using his own blood, he drew 11 skulls, which police took as a sign of 11 victims. A whole community of absolute freaks and weirdos has sprouted up around this 11 skulls symbology nonsense. Some of them send in taunts to me and Nikki, claiming they have a kill cache with our names on it. Not cool, weirdos. The FBI symposium said interstate killers actually do have comfort zones in which they operate. It's just that they have many comfort zones, all over the place, wherever they frequently visit. Itinerant populations, truckers, military personnel, corporate business types. They could be anyone, anywhere. With Keyes, for instance, if he traveled around burying kill buckets, he would have multiple zones of comfort or small radiuses of activity all over the country. That's why his case is so unnerving, I think. Just the macabre lottery of random murder. If he was in your area and he had a bucket buried nearby and he felt like it, you could be next. He broke into homes and even pulled a woman straight out of a coffee kiosk. Anyone. All of this is to say, Jones and Williams thought the killer was local, given his knowledge of the valley and of town, and knowing exactly when and where he could strike. He was clearly comfortable at Hunter Hill, in the valley, and also Cherry Street, in Ridgewood. However the kidnapping happened, and why, and who did it, the rest is not conjecture and hunches. Briggs wound up dead in the peaceful valley, a few yards from the shimmering silver-blue lake, and Ridgewood erupted. Williams recounted, "Once word got around that he wasn't just grabbing guys from Hunter Hill, we had our hands full, let me put it that way. It was the understatement of the year." Next time on Crime Adjacent. In the aftermath of Briggs's killing, gun sales in town went through the roof. Ralph Tierney, owner of the local gun and ammo store, told the Ridgewood Recorder he couldn't keep guns and rifles on the display racks. People were even buying up air guns and paintball guns. Baseball bats could not be found anywhere. Home alarm companies turned people away. They were simply too busy. If people needed to run errands, they asked neighbors to follow them or tag along. Winnie Freeman, with the Recorder, told me this: "I still haven't seen anything like it. Not even when COVID hit and there were all sorts of conspiracies and anti-mask protests. This town just completely lost its mind." If you like these stories, remember to review and like Crime Adjacent wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to check out our social media channels and our Patreon page to find bonus information and behind-the-scenes content about these cases. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with the reminder, stay tuned. You'll never unhear what happens next.